Hi everyone, this is Adam Law with Torah with a Question and Wanderings with Adam Law. And I'm going to look at what are the original sources of what Jewish mysticism truly is. And we're going to trace how all the deepest Sfarim, all the deepest ideas actually are rooted all the way back in the first Torahs. An interesting thing about Jewish mysticism is that generally people associate mysticism as the experiential experience of the divine, meaning how we connect to God, how we feel connected, which could be with the concepts of what we call in Hebrew devekut or devekus, connection, clinging, merging with God. We feel it during prayer. The word for prayer in Hebrew is tefillah, to be wrapped up in, just like we see tefillin. We wrap ourselves up in tefillin. And generally in the study of mysticism, we find that mysticism generally talks about the experiential feeling of being one and being connected to God. However, most people believe that the mystical experience is also extended to things such as prophecy and other experiences where we would see a vision or hear God. Though the Jewish tradition teaches that these things don't really happen nowadays since the period of the Second Temple. And that when we experience God, it's in a different form. Yes, we can experience God, but it's not with the same connection that we once had and we will have in the future. Nevertheless, something that is very distinctive about the Jewish tradition is the fact that we have mystical books which actually not only deal with the experience of God, but they actually speak of many other types of mysticism which are more textual. There is something called the practical Kabbalah, which is using permutations of God's names and other Hebrew letter connections to have a spiritual mystical experience. So right now I want to start from the beginning. Adam and Eve, when God created them, he put them in the Garden of Eden. You see, the Torah was given at Har Sinai. And this Torah was the same Torah which God used to create the whole universe with. It's not just this written book. It's this light of God that God used to create the worlds with. And it's a way for us to connect to God by following his commandments that we find in the Torah and by learning. So before the Torah was given in the form that was given to Moses, to Moshe, the Torah existed in a supernal earlier Torah, which existed in the highest levels before it came down to the lower levels, which we received later at the Har Sinai. And this is already talked about in the Torah. It says in Bereshis that the Lord God caused to sprout from the ground every tree that was pleasing to the sight and good for food. And it says, also the tree of life in the midst of the garden and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. In Hebrew it says, Ve'etz ha'chaim b'sok hagan, ve'etz hadas tov v'ra. The tree of life was in the center of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and bad. There are these two trees. They were both in the center of the garden, seemingly, because it says the tree of life was in the center of the garden and the tree of knowledge and good and bad. It doesn't tell you where it is. But by having that vav, that and, it implies it also was in the center of the garden. And when you look at mystical Kabbalistic diagrams, you may see that the lower world is represented by the tree of knowledge of good and bad, which the Zohar says is linked to actions in the world. There can be good and bad actions in the world. We can bring good and bad through what we do in the world. With the tree of life, the Eitz HaChaim is a higher spiritual world extending up into the upper worlds, the worlds of life. And those worlds feed into this world. So the Eitz HaDas, the tree of knowledge, and the Eitz HaChaim are intrinsically connected. It's like you see this tree, and out of the top of the tree, this other tree is growing. And we know the tree itself both draws up from below and brings down from above. The sun from above and the rain from above feed the tree. And the tree also draws up nutrients, phosphorus, etc. from the earth. And it creates these fruit. So the Holy Sfarim said these trees were created for Adam and Chava. All they had to do was not eat the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge, on the weekday. They weren't supposed to eat it. And then God would eventually give it to them on Shabbos, meaning as the things that are forbidden now, one day will be permitted. But they're not. We went too early. We got too excited and we took the fruit too early. And that was the mistake that we made. And once we cut down that lower tree, the upper tree is also uprooted. So the Eitz HaChaim, that deep spiritual light of that Torah, was also removed. And that was the deepest, highest spiritual Torah that was of just such a spiritual level we can't even imagine it. We know the Torah itself is called Eitz HaChaim, right? As we know in Mishnah, Eitz HaChaim hi l'machazikim ba. It's a tree of life to those who hold fast to it. It's a spiritual tree of life. But yet it's more distant. Since we committed the sin of the Eitz Hadas, the sin of the tree of knowledge, the Eitz HaChaim, that tree now is not accessible. And that's why it says here in the Torah in Bereshis that God had to kick us out of the garden in order that we don't eat from the Eitz HaChaim. We've been too powerful. Now that we'd acclimated the evil of the tree of knowledge, if we had access to the Eitz HaChaim, their power would be magnified. And that also is represented by the light of creation that God created and hid away. God saw that the wicked, i.e. the people who do sins like Adam and Chava and everyone who comes out of that, will do great damage. The Torah calls itself in the Gemara a potion of life and a potion of death. Now the Torah, since we don't have access to the supernal early Torah of the Eitz HaChaim, we only have access to the Eitz Hadas, the tree of knowledge. And we have to fix that. And we do mitzvahs, we can connect this world to the upper world. We've been lowered. The Torah that we received is the same Torah, the supernal highest Torah, but it's now been lowered to being a more physical Torah. That Eitz Hadas Torah of Tov Ra, of doing actions and not doing other actions, of ases and los ases. That's what the Torah is now. But when we do those mitzvahs, we also bring down that upper light of the Eitz HaChaim, but we don't have direct access to it like we used to. And we will again once have access to that tree fully. But right now we get it in little drips and drabs. We get a little bit of that light when we do mitzvahs in Torah. But we have to fix the Eitz Hadas. And then when we do, we will get that light of the Eitz HaChaim. However, there's an exception to that. The Zohar claims about itself that it is the Eitz HaChaim. It is this light. And that as we're moving towards the generations, as we're moving more and more towards fixing the chaos of the world and moving towards redemption, there is a possibility of the revelation of that light to happen all the time. That we are receiving that spiritual light through studying Jewish mysticism. Through that light, we can access that original light of creation. Right? When we do mitzvahs, we become tzaddikim, we can access that original light, the Eitz HaChaim. And that is a very great thing. And it's going to get more and more and more. And that's why such deep Torahs, such as the Zohar and the Ari and the Hasidus, has been revealed so late in time. Is because these deep Torahs, these mystical Torahs, which are now accessible for everybody, are a sign that we're moving towards a redemptive era, a higher era where the true life and spirituality of the original light of creation will be revealed to us. So the whole study of mysticism went through many, many stages. Though all these teachings go all the way back to Adam and Chava, at different points in time, a revelation was necessary for the people of the time to have access to these deepest Torahs. One of the earliest books we have is the Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah is one of the first books that talks about the 10 spheros, these 10 mystical attributes which God used as a palette to create the world. And these worlds, the worlds of the spheros, are the worlds which we directly relate to in our job in Tikkun Olam, of fixing the world. So Sefer Yetzirah is one of the oldest books. It's attributed to Avraham, and the book was eventually written down into the form that we have today. It's one of the deepest books. It talks about numbers and letters and the constellations and the body. It talks about the interrelatedness, how everything in the world is a microcosm for something else. That when we affect one thing in the world, it affects everything else. The Sefer Yetzirah talks about the light that God used to create the world with, and which we also can change the world and fix the world with. Another literature is called the Hechalot literature, the Hechalos literature. And it's related to the Meiser Merkava. The Meiser Merkava is the vision that Ezekiel and Isaiah had It speaks of the throne of glory and the upper worlds and the angels and animals and different spirits forms that are up there and the awesomeness that Ezekiel and Isaiah experienced. And this vision is possible to achieve through something called the Merkava, writing the Merkava. Mystical meditations. A lot of this literature has been lost, but the Hechalos literature is still extant, and it's a way that ancient Jews used to go and visit the upper worlds. And these are dangerous places to visit. You can't just leave this world and go to the upper worlds without expecting there to be great danger. And so too there was. We see the story in the Gemara and Chagiga of 4 went up to Pardes, to these spiritual worlds, and only 1 made it out, and that was Rabbi Akiva. And even he had great danger. Getting into the deep mystical stuff can be very dangerous because one gets so attached to the spiritual and mystical ideas that are up there that they may not want to come down. Rabbi Nachman, Maimonides, and others speak about how difficult it is to get involved in these deep philosophical concepts. They're not for everyone. It can be very dangerous and damaging to go to an upper world, lest one make a mistake when they're up there. As it says in the Gemara there, and we also find in the Hechelot literature, when you go to the place of pure marble stones, do not say water, water, i.e. do not ascribe duality to the world. You must recognize the world is all one. That is the most important experience, mystical experience that we can have, is to realize that we're all one and connected with God. And the Merkava and Hekelot literature speak of the mystical experience in which one can gaze upon the throne of glory in the upper worlds and get a deep understanding of what that is. Not for everybody. And then, of course, there's this Holy Zohar, which was revealed by Rabbi Shimon and his compatriots, put down in manuscripts, and finally published less than 1,000 years ago. And this book deals with every possible subject of Jewish mysticism, and is also a commentary on the Torah, and tells us what's going on behind the scenes. However, it wasn't truly understood until the great lion, the Arizal, Isaac Luria, came into the world. And he sat by the Nile in his exile in Egypt. And there, for 14 years, he studied the Zohar and studied all the deepest Torahs in there and meditated on them until he got a full revelation of Eliyahu, Hanavi. And there he went to Sfat and only lived for 2 years. And there he overstepped the great Rebbes that were there, Rabbi Yosef Karo and the Ramak, Rabbi Moshe Cordovero. And he instantly became the greatest Kabbalist. And he revealed his Torahs, which are still being brought down to this day through the teachings of Hasidus and the Sephardi literature of the Ben Ish Chai and the Rashash and others. This literature was called the Kabbalah. And we are now moving towards an era where more and more of these Torahs are revealed, from the Baal Shem Tov and the Hasidic movement, and now in the land of Israel. If we had true access to the spiritual teachings of Jewish mysticism, meditation, we wouldn't need all this Western, New Age, type of stuff. We wouldn't need all these different spiritual treatments and everything like that. Everything, hafok, kolbo, everything is in the Torah. Because the Torah itself is just, it looks just like a book. But what it is black fire on white fire. All the spiritual lights of all the worlds, of heaven and earth, of the Eitz HaChaim, are found in this book. And yes, the fact that it is now in the form of the Eitz HaDas, the tree of knowledge, means that we have to act and repair this actual world. But we are bringing down the spiritual lights of the Eitz HaChaim, the deep lights of creation that are being revealed. It will be fully revealed. The time of redemption may be very soon. Lag BaOmer has a few different significances. As we know, the story of Rabbi Akiva's students who were dying, and that ceased on Lag BaOmer. And that ends the mourning period of the Omer, and moves to the rest of the Omer until Shavuos. We don't have the same restrictions according to the mainstream customs. But something big happened on Lag BaOmer too, and that was the death of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And the day that he died, it was the Idra Rabbah, the Great Assembly, where he revealed the deepest mystical secrets of the Tzelem Elokim, of what it means that we are in the image of God. And those are found in the Zohar. And all the teachings of the Zohar were compiled and put down in manuscripts and eventually published later on, about a little less than 1,000 years ago. But they all come from the original teachings in the light of the high yeshiva of Rabbi Shimon and his experiences, talking to angels and the Mashiach and all sorts of tzaddikim and all the upper levels when he was in the cave, and he revealed this to his companions. And that's the significance of Lag BaOmer. We have bonfires It's a giant yahrzeit candle for Rabbi Shimon, where we experience this tremendous joy to be around the tzaddik who revealed it. And there's Rabbi Shimon in every generation. Just like Rabbi Shimon revealed the light of Moshe Rabbeinu, so too the later Rebbes, such as the Baal Shem Tov and the Arizal and Rabbi Nachman, revealed the holy light, each generation of the revelation, as the light gets stronger and stronger as we move towards redemption, and we get a little bit more of the Eitz HaChaim. You see, this Torah, this supernal Torah, even though now the Torah we have is so much about do and don't do, and rules and restrictions, under that, within that Eitz HaDas, is this Eitz HaChaim, the supernal hidden Torah, which is getting more and more visible. We're seeing it more and more. As we're fixing this Eitz HaDas, the clouds are disappearing, and we're seeing the Eitz HaChaim more and more and more. The revelations of these deepest Torahs that we're having. And now even more so that we have the revelation that we're able to live in Eretz Yisrael and gather as a people. And even go visit on Lag BaOmer, the holy Rebbe, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, the holy Tana that's found in Meron. And we gather together as one, as the Jewish people in the land of Israel. And we celebrate the Yahrzeit Rabbi Shimon and the gathering of the Jewish people. There's a special bracha you can say when you have so many Jews together, 600,000 Jews together. What a holy thing to have Lag BaOmer, the holy Jewish holiday, where we all get together and we're in the deepest Torahs, the Torahs of the Eitz HaChaim. This is Adam Law with Wanderings and Torah with a Question. I hope you're well, and thanks for watching.